and finally, the inner sanctum of the White House. Until one day, it all went wrong.
Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North has been relieved of his duties on the National Security Council staff.
The only persons in the United States government that knew precisely about this, the only person was Lieutenant Colonel North.
I was not fully informed on the nature of one of the activities undertaken.
We are presently looking into the legal aspects of it as to whether there's any criminality involved.
Now, Oliver North has come out with his version of the Iran-Contra scandal.
A majority believed that President Reagan did know, and I thought so too. And now, 5 years later, I'm even more convinced. President Reagan knew everything.
A Nightline exclusive. A conversation with Oliver North. The first interview since the Iran-Contra scandal. Now reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
This is not a broadcast that requires a great deal of setup. If you have not heard of Ollie North or the Iran-Contra affair, it's probably way past your bedtime anyway. And since the hour is late, even for the adults among you, let me get right to the charge that is making all the news. Colonel North has written in his new book that he is convinced that President Reagan knew everything about the Iran-Contra affair. And we're going to begin by looking at some of the evidence he cited. Actually, we're going to listen to it. And if you would, Colonel North, give us a little bit of background on this piece of tape, and we're going to listen to two parts of it. In fact, we're going to listen to it twice, but just give us a little background as to how this tape came into the possession of you and your attorneys.
In the process of preparing for trial, Ted, we were the recipients of an enormous quantity of information. Among the 50 or so tapes that we received, that we had asked for, was one labeled simply Citibank tape. This was also in a pile of tens of thousands of documents. And when my attorneys played it, they were, to say the least, excited about what was on the tape and what did it really mean.
Now, let me just interrupt you for a moment, because in point of fact, what our viewers will hear on that tape right now is actually four voices, and this has probably happened to some of you before when you've been on a phone call, and all of a sudden, for reasons that you can't understand, there appears to be a crossed line. And you will hear most clearly, and we're just going to play it in the clear for you first so that you can hear it, and after about 30 or 40 seconds of it, we're going to go back and play it again, and we will spell out in type on the bottom of your screen what is being said between two men whose conversation bleeds into an initial conversation between two employees, two women of Citibank. Take a listen.
And there's a smoking gun in the closet.
What?
Reagan knows. I told the committee. There was no... I told the committee there was...
Cindy, yeah. Wait, excuse me, this is really bizarre.
Knows about it.
Why don't you call me back? No, listen, this is great.
Reagan knows about it.
This is who?
And the...
This is Maria, but listen to this guy.
The other people involved do know about it. Well, you have to go to the committee.
Did you hear what that is? That's Reagan's, that smoking gun stuff? Yes.
Now, it is truly a bizarre conversation, as that one woman said, but in part because the women's voices are louder than the men's voices. What we're going to do is play it for you again now, and this time we will spell out for you at the bottom of your screen just what the men are saying. Listen again.
And there's a smoking gun in the closet.
What?
Reagan knows. I told the committee. There was no... I told the committee there was...
Cindy, yeah. Wait, excuse me, this is really bizarre.
Knows about it.
Why don't you call me back? No, listen, this is great.
Reagan knows about it.
This is who?
And the...
This is Maria, but listen to this guy.
The other people involved do know about it. Well, you have to go to the committee.
Did you hear what that is? That's Reagan's, that smoking gun stuff? Yes.
You have to go to the committee, not me. Listen, somebody's got to bring this up.
Oh, I'm going to keep this line. Do you have another line coming in? No, I don't have to disconnect this one so I can listen to this also?
Somebody ought to go.
Call me on folderol 2. But don't disconnect it. Yeah, this is interesting. 971?
Yeah.
Okay.
We tore all stuff up. No, he's got all the memos and there are copies. Did you burn it? No. What's wrong with you? I worked here. Nobody. You'll hit the papers like crazy. Nobody told me to.
Marie, do you believe this?
No. What about your secretary? She couldn't get the stuff out for you? Not all of it.
It's really strange. I don't believe this.
Reagan, well,
Koppel, what the hell is
I'm getting out of this thing, and if somebody comes to me, I'm blowing the cover. I say, if I go down, I'm taking you with me. Well, me too.
Barbara, I am getting the weirdest conversation on 49 about Reagan and the smoking gun, and that the guy knows. Oh, it's just coming out. It is so bizarre. Like he's...
I'm going to call
No!
you back.
Shit!
I think we're back. No. All right, bye.
Is that for real, Cindy?
You must have gone crazy when you heard that the first time. I should point out that this is the first time that tape has been heard by anyone other than, what, the FBI and your attorneys?
Well, certainly, I know that my attorneys have heard it, and I know that they took it to the White House looking for help in identifying who the two parties were that knew so much about what the president was aware of. Beyond that, I'm not certain who else has heard it, except I'm quite confident that the congressional committees that spent so much time and money investigating this did not hear it.
Have not heard it.
That's my understanding.
How do you know that?
Well, I believe that my chief counsel today, Brendan Sullivan, talked with the man who was then the chief counsel of the Senate committee, and he apprised him of that fact.
Arthur Lyman.
Yes.
Do you think it would have made any difference? I mean, is that what you're pointing at as the smoking gun that makes you believe that President Reagan knew?
Well, the actual term, there's a smoking gun in the closet, is a delightfully mixed metaphor which is on the tape. I don't necessarily think, Ted, that there is a smoking gun. I draw my conclusion that the president knew everything based on the fact that I worked there for almost 5.5 years.
We're going to take a break in just a minute, and I'll give you a chance to go through all those different points. But what I'd like to hear from you is, do you think that tape proves anything?
All by itself?
Yeah.
Probably not. You can't identify who the men are, and you can't ask them further questions. As much as we wanted to, we couldn't either. But that tape taken in totality with the rest of what happened, I think gives very strong circumstantial evidence that the president did indeed know everything.
All right, well, we'll give you a chance to list some of that other circumstantial evidence when we come back, which we'll do in just a moment.
This Nightline exclusive is brought to you by Charles Schwab.
Everyone has a dream, a vision deep inside.
When I decide to follow up on an investing idea, I need a broker who's ready when I am.
We make it easier to follow your own lead.
I can call Schwab at any hour, nights or weekends, get the information I need, even place an order to trade.
Always there to give you just the help you need.
Help yourself at Schwab today.
The white zone is for immediate.
We didn't design the new Mazda MX-3 to be like apple pie. Jalapenos were what we had in mind. Because if something's not worth having an opinion about it, it's not worth having. And with the only V6 in its class, the MX-3 is one hot chili pepper. Hey, you're not John Doe. Why drive his car? The new MX-3 from the new Mazda.
It just feels right!
Home for the Holidays. A special celebration to brighten your home for the holiday season is on now at Paul Scott's Drexel Heritage. Order quality home furnishings now, and Paul Scott's will ensure delivery before the holidays. Take advantage of our premier holiday sale event and save on Drexel Heritage, including all dining rooms, leather and upholstery, perfect for all your holiday gatherings. Save during the Home for the Holidays celebration, on now at Paul Scott's Drexel Heritage.
This is Dolly. She's wrinkled. This is the Pure Wool +1 suit from Nordstrom. It's not wrinkled. Good dog. Shamelessly wrinkled. Comfortable, good-looking, and definitely not wrinkled. Creased, crinkled, pleated, furrowed, and downright corrugated. Not so the suit. Okay, so Dolly can fetch.
The largest Medicare health maintenance plan in America may be cutting costs by cutting care.
I don't trust them at all.
Primetime investigates Thursday.
And we're back live once again with Colonel Oliver North. Just another moment on that tape. You were never able to establish to whom those two voices belonged. I'm talking about the two men on that tape.
No, for all of our efforts at trying, Ted, we were unable to identify who either one of them were.
You have a guess?
Well, I've made a supposition that one of the voices sounds a bit to me like Ed Hickey's.
He's dead now.
Ed was the director of the White House Military Office, a man who had been very close to President Reagan back as far as when he was governor, and had come to Washington with the president. And the man who basically ran the Secret Service and the White House Military Office.
All right, but you've never been able to prove that. Now, let's go through some of the other circumstantial evidence, and you grant in your book that the only evidence you have that brings you to the conclusion that Ronald Reagan knew is all circumstantial, right?
Absolutely right.
Okay, let's go through it.
Well, first of all, I worked there. I know how it was done, how memoranda were prepared, and how the president was briefed, and I was a participant in a lot of both of those. Second of all, there is no doubt that the president was fully aware of a number of things about the administration's support for the Nicaraguan resistance that he blatantly denied. He was fully aware of them, and over time, some of those have come out. Second of all, he was aware of things dealing with the hostage matter. That is, our initiative to rescue the American hostages in Beirut, that there were a number of things undertaken that he also denied.
I don't want to drive you, but we've got very limited time, and you're not going to get to the points I know you want to make, and I want to give you a chance to make them so that then I can come at you on some of those things.
And
3 people came to see you, and your attorney.
Indeed. Well, let me just...
Take it in your own order.
Ross Perot came to see me and urged that I basically exonerate the president. I was approached by a military aide from the White House who urged that I exonerate the president. We received a missive from another former close friend of the president who urged the same thing.
Paul Laxalt.
Exactly. And all 3 of them basically said, look, waive your protections under the Constitution and go out and clear the president. In each of those cases, I think that there was reason for them to be doing that at a time when the administration was making a very strong push to say this was a loose cannon on the gun deck estate.
All right, let me stop you on those 3 cases. I talked to Ross Perot this afternoon. He flatly denies your version of the story. He says all he urged you to do was tell the truth.
Well, in fact, Mr. Perot, in addition to talking to you, also issued a 4-page press statement that I have a copy of.
Don't read the whole thing.
Certainly wouldn't. Let me just, in sum, tell you that Mr. Perot has apparently forgotten, or at least neglects to mention, it wasn't one meeting with Ross Perot. It was 2 meetings, one on the 11th of December and one on the 17th of December. There was also a phone call.
1986.
In 1986. The second meeting on the 17th of December is also the same day that I was visited by the White House military aide. It was also the day after the committees had decided that they would not grant me immunity. I look at Mr. Perot's statement, and it's very clear to me that Ross Perot was not coming to me as some roving ambassador of the truth. What Mr. Perot urged me to do was to exonerate the president.
Let me again stop you on this, because it is entirely feasible that Ross Perot, who is after all a very independent man, and Paul Laxalt, who is also a very independent man, could have come to you without Ronald Reagan or anyone at the White House knowing anything about it. The military aide you referred to was a military aide to the then Vice President, George Bush. From what you know about military aides, would a military aide who would be, what, roughly at the same rank that you were, Colonel, Lieutenant Colonel?
Roughly.
Would a Lieutenant Colonel on his own decide to come over and say, Mr. Sullivan, I think your client ought to waive his Fifth Amendment rights and clear the president?
I don't know what motivated any of these people.
I'm not asking you what would motivate him. A military officer, would he, on his own, if he works for the White House, would he presume to involve himself in a case like this if he weren't told to?
I can't speak for that officer, Ted. I can only say that the military officers that worked at the White House, either at the NSC or the White House Military Office or the Vice President's office, all took their orders from their relative superiors.
Unlikely, then?
Unlikely that someone would, I believe, unlikely that any of these people did this totally independently.
All right, let's take a break and we'll come back with more in our conversation with Oliver North in just a moment.
This Nightline exclusive will continue after these messages.
They say the revolution is over. They say we'll have to work harder and harder just to stay where we are. They say the way things work now is the way it'll always be. But I say they're wrong.
Everywhere you look, people want to build a new world. It's time to give them new tools.
Food reporter Bert Wolf for Puritan Oil from the makers of Crisco.
The newspapers are filled with saturated fat. If you're reading the stories and cooking smarter for your family, and you'd like to know once and for all which type of cooking oil is lowest in saturated fat, read the back of the Puritan label. Here's the most common vegetable oil. Here's olive oil, corn oil, and Puritan oil. It's lower than all three. Puritan oil, 94% unsaturated. No oil is lower. Now here's a smart way to make a chicken stir fry. With skinless chicken, white meat only, it has less fat, but it still tastes great because Crisco makes Puritan oil. And they make it to let the delicious, light taste of your cooking come through. With Puritan, you can cut down on saturated fat, and I promise your family won't miss it.
94% unsaturated Puritan oil from Crisco. Trust Crisco, because you're cooking for your family.
Even when it comes to luxury cars, there's nothing like word-of-mouth advertising.
Lincoln Town Car is the epitome of unabashed American-style luxury.
The people have spoken. America's #1 dream car is Lincoln Town Car.
Our readers' poll declared Lincoln Town Car as the best domestic automobile by a wide margin.
See your 5-star Lincoln Mercury dealer.
It's every family's nursing home nightmare. Hidden cameras show elderly patients alone and abused, living in hell. On 2020, Friday.
Tomorrow, perestroika, a noble idea, but what went wrong?
Plus self-made billionaire H. Ross Perot and Joan Collins here on Good Morning America tomorrow.
And we're back live again with Colonel Oliver North. One more piece of circumstantial evidence. You got a phone call from Ronald Reagan the day you were let go, was it?
That evening, Ted, I went out to a hotel in Northern Virginia, trying to get away from the members of the Fourth Estate that were encircling the White House and my home. And while I was there, the president called me and put it in a way that I later, in reflection, considered to be perhaps strange. He said to me, you just have to understand. I didn't know. There are, I suppose, a number of different ways that he might have put that. We all know that the president rarely was unscripted in his communications. I think it's entirely likely that those words were carefully prepared.
There is one other possibility, and that is that he meant exactly what he said. You have to understand, I didn't know. I mean, you know, in a sense, it almost sounds, you know, like clutching at straws for you to pull out that sentence and say, I infer from that the president was saying to me, Of course I knew. He's saying, you have to understand, I didn't know. Pretty simple sentence.
Well, I think if you just took any one of these things as an individual item and ignored all the rest of it, you might come to that conclusion. But at the time that this was all happening, and immediately after the president's phone call, there was a concerted effort on the part of the administration to literally destroy me. They disparaged my reputation in every way that they possibly could. This was Oliver North, the loose cannon on the gun deck estate. He was off all on his own. No one else knew about it. Since that time, and over the course of the 5 years that have preceded and all the inquisitions, we now know there's many other people who knew many other elements of this whole puzzle that's come out in various testimony, in various trials and tribunals and admissions. And it leads me to believe, when you look at all of this and the tape we just heard, that there's ample evidence to me to convince me that the president knew everything.
Bill Casey knew, the then director of the CIA.
He did indeed.
You worked very closely with him.
I did work with Director Casey. He taught me a lot of what I needed to know in order to make these things happen.
He had one of those last mysterious, another wonderfully ambiguous phrase. He said something to you the last time you saw him.
Well, in his conversation, the last conversation of length with me was to commend me on how well I had done at holding the Nicaraguan resistance together. The conversation I believe you may be referring to and alluded to in the book was referred to me by one of his relatives at his wake, the night before his funeral, in which she told me that one of Bill Casey's last words to her was, "He'll never get away with it."
And you assume he meant?
The president.
Why do you assume that?
Simply because he was one of the few people who seemed to be trying to get away with things at that point in time. Surely I wasn't. I was abiding by the advice of my counsel to say nothing. There were people like Ross Perot who were coming to me with strong messages to simply stand aside and exonerate the president.
Let me read you something that Ross Perot said to me this afternoon when I talked to him, talking about you. The man who wouldn't step forward and tell the truth is now just willing to sell the truth. Catchy phrase, talking about this, your book. It's a tough thing that he's saying, but you know there are a lot of people out there right now, particularly conservatives, who feel betrayed by you, who feel betrayed that you would now go after Ronald Reagan.
Well, for 5 years I have steadfastly refused to say anything negative about the people that I work with. I don't believe this book is a negative book. I believe this book is my chance to...
Negative about Reagan.
It depends on your perspective.
Well,
Ted.
I mean...
I also acknowledge in that book that the world has changed dramatically because of it.
You do indeed. But you are now, 5 years later, at a time when, I mean, you know, the book's going to sell a lot of books.
One would hope.
It wouldn't sell a lot of books if you didn't have at least one headline in there. And my colleagues and I have all pulled the same headline out of it. And it's one that you sort of give with one hand and take away with the other. You say, I believe he knew, but on the other hand, I can't prove it.
Well, let me just deal with the unhappiness of you and your colleagues, and perhaps the unhappiness of many of my conservative colleagues. This book tells it the way I remember it, and the best words that I could find. I didn't choose the headlines that people have now chosen to put in the papers. And I can understand your frustration and perhaps the frustration of President Reagan's friends. The facts are, I think, before the American people. Very clearly, the American people didn't believe President Reagan when he said he didn't know. Quite honestly, I think the president knew, and I tell why in this story. If that's frustrating to those who say this isn't really the smoking gun in the closet, as the tape says, or if it goes too far for those who want to believe that he didn't know anything, I'm sorry. But I will let the American people choose, once they conclude reading the book, which way it really was.
All right, we have to take another break. When we come back, I'd like to ask you about George Bush and what you think he knew. Back in a moment with Colonel North.
This Nightline exclusive will continue after these messages.
Just strap it on.
All across America, people are throwing in the towel. The scrub brush, the rubber gloves, and refusing to wash all their dishes before they wash their dishes. They're turning off their faucets and turning on the Maytag Jet Clean dishwasher that scrubs with 47 powerful jets, filters, then disposes. It's made to get dishes clean, no strings attached. Or a repairman. The Jet Clean dishwasher from Maytag, the dependability people.
Today, Tech Tread Shoe Corporation announced a major retail expansion in 25 U.S. cities.
When I see a company that looks like a good investment, I check it out myself.
We make it easier to follow your own lead.
At Charles Schwab, I can get quotes, financial news, and when I make a trade, commission savings.
Always there to give you just the help you need.
Help yourself at Schwab today.
Presto! Great food's easy, but how are you going to make lunch disappear?
Uh-oh.
Easy. Now you see it. Now you don't.
Detergent alone can't catch all unreported stains. The ones you don't discover till the dryer bakes them in. Try Biz Bleach with your detergent to catch many tough stains before it's too late.
It did disappear. You doubt my powers. Biz gets the stains to get by you.
Just a couple of minutes left. Colonel North, George Bush. He was involved in some of this, wasn't he? He sat in on some of those meetings. He would have known how much?
Well, the vice president sat in on a lot of meetings. I've put in the book exactly what I recall of what the vice president was aware of and what he did.
We've only got a few seconds tonight. Give me a sense, just an overview.
Well, there's no doubt that the Vice President Bush, when he was involved in the activities of the administration's support for the resistance. The
Contras?
The Contras, was aware of a number of things that were going on.
The arms sales to the Iranians?
I'm confident that he did, yes.
Now, the big question, of course, is, and I know this is something we're going to want to focus on tomorrow night, the diversion.
So-called diversion.
So-called diversion. We call it diversion, you like another phrase.
Well, the use of the residuals to support the Nicaraguan resistance was a matter that certainly Admiral Poindexter was aware of, and Director Casey, and I believe the President. I did not raise it with Vice President Bush. Whether others did or not, I can't say, and therefore I didn't say in this book.
You have given vent to a certain amount of speculation on Ronald Reagan. Take 5 seconds to do it on George Bush. You think he knew?
Well, I don't have the same kind of circumstantial evidence when it comes to Vice President, now President Bush, that I had with President Reagan.
Okay, that, I'm afraid, is all the time we've got for this evening. Colonel North will be joining us again live tomorrow night at our regular time for a more extended conversation. And there is, of course, a lot left to be discussed. We'll be talking more about George Bush and what he did or did not know. On the lighter side, there is Colonel North's recollection of the famous chocolate cake, the key, the pistols, and the Bible that he and a number of other Americans took with them on their first secret mission to Tehran. There is a bizarre meeting and an even more bizarre offer made to Colonel North by Manuel Noriega. We'll play some more of the audio tapes that Nightline first made public a couple of weeks ago, tapes of secret meetings between Americans and Iranians. And we'll see what memories they rekindle. That and much more as we continue our conversation with Oliver North tomorrow on Nightline. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night. The voice is Oliver North.
10 hours. Immediately, 10 hours immediately after their release. The airplane will land with the remaining missile parts.
A charge has been made that the United States has shipped weapons to Iran as ransom payment for the release of American hostages in Lebanon. Those charges are utterly false.
Before I left Washington, Bill Casey had calmly handed me a strip of 6 white triangular pills in a sealed plastic wrapper. "Take these with you," he said. "You may need them if things get bad."
A Nightline exclusive. A conversation with Oliver North. The first interview since the Iran-Contra scandal. Now reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Colonel North, welcome back. We have a lot of ground to cover tonight, but we need to begin with some of the reaction generated by Oliver North's appearance on this broadcast last night. Colonel North has expressed his conviction that President Reagan knew everything about the Iran-Contra affair. To support that allegation, he cites several pieces of circumstantial evidence. A quote from CIA Director William Casey, his last words to a relative. "He'll never get away with it," Casey is alleged to have said. You said you thought that Casey was probably talking about Ronald Reagan and Iran-Contra. We received a call today from Mr. Casey's widow, Sophia. She described Colonel North's conjecture as a fantasy and a lie. We played an audio tape for you last night on which two unidentified male voices talk about Reagan and a smoking gun in the closet. You suggested that one of the voices might have belonged to Ed Hickey, who was director of the White House Military Office and an assistant to President Reagan. Ed Hickey is also dead, but his widow sent a letter to me today saying that she and several of her sons who listened to the tape are convinced that none of the voices was that of her late husband. Colonel North also told me last night that he and his lawyer, Brendan Sullivan, had been contacted by 3 men, each of whom had urged North to give up his Fifth Amendment rights and clear President Reagan's name. I've spoken with all 3, H. Ross Perot, Paul Laxalt, and retired Lieutenant Colonel Terry Matke, a former military aide to then Vice President Bush. All 3 deny the allegation. We'll get Colonel North's reaction shortly. First, though, this report from Nightline correspondent Jeff Greenfield.
The hearing will please come to order.
More than 4 years after Marine Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North held the fate of a president and the attention of the nation in his hands, he has spoken again, and old ghosts are stirring.
I believe when you look at all of this, that there's ample evidence to me to convince me that the president knew everything.
Why is this assertion drawing national attention? Not because of any hard proof, but because of how different history would have been had it been shown that Ronald Reagan knew that funds from the arms sales to Iran were being diverted to help the Nicaraguan Contras. Arthur Lyman was counsel to the Senate members of the Iran-Contra Committee.
If the case had been made on the diversion, then the president would have been impeached. Similarly, if the case had been made that the president had directed the cover-up, which Oliver North testified about at length, as did other witnesses, the president would have been impeached.
The only hint of evidence offered by North is a mysterious tape, allegedly capturing a conversation accidentally recorded during a routinely taped phone call between 2 Citibank employees.
And there's a smoking gun in the closet.
What?
Reagan knows.
Today, Lyman politely but pointedly regretted that independent counsel Lawrence Walsh had not brought that tape to the committee's attention.
It seems to me that the independent counsel should have been able to identify the participants if the tape is not a hoax, and that I would have liked to have known.
Other assertions of North's were firmly denied. North says that billionaire H. Ross Perot came to his lawyers in late 1986 as a White House emissary with a message to exonerate President Reagan and an offer of financial help.
I told him in the meeting that I felt that a man who was prepared to die for his country should be prepared to tell the truth for his country, and that it looked terrible for a Naval Academy graduate to take the Fifth Amendment, and if they would simply tell the truth, put all the facts on the table, and get this over with in a few days, I would pay his legal bills, take care of his family if he went to jail, and help him get started when he got out.
The only persons in the United States government that knew precisely about this, the only person was Lieutenant Colonel North. The president knew nothing about it until I reported it to him. I alerted him yesterday. From former Attorney General Ed Meese, who first revealed the story of the diversion, came this response.
I think as far as history is concerned, people are going to go back to look at what are the identifiable facts, what has been proved, what hasn't been proved, and on that basis, I think the facts, as we discovered them that weekend and as they were later borne out by the committee, that Ronald Reagan did have nothing to do with, nor did he know of, the diversion of funds. I think that is what history will show.
For Reagan opponents, the book shows that the effort to evade the law
was an administration-wide policy.
And when you have dozens of high officials running around raising money for the Contras from third countries and going along with arms deals with Ayatollah, no wonder North felt like he was authorized and that the president would have gone along with it.
For Reagan loyalists, like Congressman Henry Hyde, North's assertions raise a dilemma. During the Iran-Contra hearings, championing Oliver North was a way of defending the beleaguered President Reagan. Thank you. Now that North has accused Reagan of concealing his knowledge and of abandoning his troops, where does Congressman Hyde come down? Squarely in the middle.
I'm just unwilling to believe the president would willfully lie to the American people. I don't think he did. Oliver North has a different perspective, and as I say, one that I can be very sympathetic with. But I, as both a North supporter and a Reagan supporter, I still support both without reaching the conclusions that Ollie reaches in his book.
And how will history remember North? Ben Bradley Jr. was Oliver North's biographer.
History will not judge him very kindly. I think that he'll be remembered as the person who symbolized and in fact championed an extra-legal foreign policy, flouted the law of the land, pursuing what he and others believe to be in the national interest.
What makes Oliver North's book so significant is the mindset of the author. Most attacks on President Reagan come from those who never shared his worldview or his political premises. But these assertions, that Reagan concealed the truth of what he knew in order to save himself, come not from the liberal left, but from one of the most loyal foot soldiers in the Reagan Revolution. I'm Jeff Greenfield for Nightline.
And Colonel North will have a chance to respond to some of those responses when we come back live in just a moment.
This Nightline exclusive is brought to you by Infinity.
It took time and hard work. No one had ever done it before. The technology that combined front-wheel drive and multi-link suspension simply didn't exist. 5 years later, there is the Infinity G20 mid-size luxury sedan. And the chance to discover what's already been called one of the best handling cars in the world is right around the corner.
All across America, people are throwing in the towel. The scrub brush, the rubber gloves, and refusing to wash all their dishes before they wash their dishes. They're turning off their faucets and turning on the Maytag Jet Clean dishwasher that scrubs with 47 powerful jets, filters, then disposes. It's made to get dishes clean, no strings attached. Or a repairman. The Jet Clean dishwasher from Maytag, the dependability people.
It was minutes before the biggest race of my life. The starter had called us to the starting line, and we started taking our sweats off. And as I pulled my sweat off, it kind of rubbed my eye. I reached down to pull the contact out, and I realized that I had ripped it. It was a very different and very scary feeling going down that runway. And now, after the RK surgery, now my eyes are 20/20. When I open my eyes in the morning, I can see just as clear as everybody else.
This is Dolly. She's wrinkled. This is the Pure Wool +1 suit from Nordstrom. It's not wrinkled. Good dog. Shamelessly wrinkled. Comfortable, good-looking, and definitely not wrinkled. Creased, crinkled, pleated, furrowed, and downright corrugated. Not so the suit. Okay, so Dolly can fetch.
The largest Medicare health maintenance plan in America may be cutting costs by cutting care.
I don't trust them at all.
Primetime investigates Thursday.
And we are back live with Colonel Oliver North. Pick up with Sophia Casey. She says fantasy, lie. In fact, what she said to us was that for the last 2 months of his life, her husband, Bill Casey, was paralyzed from head to toe, couldn't even talk.
As I indicated in the book, Ted, that was information passed to me by a relative at the wake. She didn't say it happened the last day or the last week or the last month. She said that those were among the last words that Bill Casey had said to her.
In the last days of his life, you write in the book.
And indeed, I have no reason to disbelieve that. What you've done is you've assembled, it seems to me, a fair collection of the same cast of characters that wanted indeed to cast this guy over the side.
This guy being you?
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is, Ted, in those last days and in the immediate days following my departure from the White House, there was no effort to have me tell the truth. None of those people that came to me, none of this correspondence that was delivered to my lawyer says anything about the truth. It says exonerate the president. In fact, the exact words are, President Reagan had no prior knowledge of the operative facts, transactions, and occurrences relating to what
are you reading from?
I am reading from a letter sent to my attorneys by Senator Laxalt, urging that I go out, waive my Fifth Amendment protections that my attorneys had said I needed to avail myself of. Ross Perot did not urge me to tell the truth.
Let me ask you to stay on Senator Laxalt for a moment, because I spoke with him this afternoon, and I must say, of all the responses that I've gotten, his was the weakest, because he didn't remember who asked him to deliver that legal memorandum, as he described it. Would you also consider, I mean, that's really a memorandum that advises you that if you were to exonerate the president, you would not be voiding your own Fifth Amendment rights. Right?
Among other things, it suggests the language that might be used not only by me, but by Admiral Poindexter. And the facts are, when Ross Perot, or when Paul Laxalt, or a military aide came, the entire quest was exonerate the president, waive your Fifth Amendment protections, and go out and make this kind of a statement that says that the president had no prior knowledge, etc. Ross Perot did not talk about the truth. He did not come, as I said last night, as the roving ambassador of the truth. He came to get me to exonerate the president. He never offered to pay my legal bills, and if he's disputing that, he's not just disputing my word, he's disputing the word of Brendan Sullivan, and if he wants to bite off a piece of that potted plant, let him chew all he wants. The fact of the matter is that what happened to me, okay, in those last days, and as I moved on toward that hearing, were very clearly efforts, as I perceived them, by an administration that had made a great effort to distance itself from anything that I had done.
You have never called it a cover-up, but it sounds as though that's what you're describing.
Well, what the actual effect of all of that is to deny things that had been going on since 1984.
Is that a cover-up?
I'm going to let you use the words.
No, I'm just asking you, and I'm asking you whether you find anything offensive about that word, or whether you would accept it as an accurate description.
No, I don't accept a lot of what has been said in the last 24 hours as an accurate description at all. I hear the words accused the president. I hear the words flouted the law, extra legal, attacks on the president in the warm-up that got us to this point right here, and none of that is the essence of this book. This book is my experience of 5.5 years in that administration, in extraordinary events, serving a president that literally changed the world for the better.
Yeah,
and there's a lot. No, let me. Ted, you cut me off last night on that. Let me finish.
Colonel North, you didn't just fall off the turnip truck either. Yeah. You knew that when you wrote that in that book, that would be the lead of every story that was going to be written about.
Wrong.
That was going to. You didn't know that?
Ted, wrong. The lead that was picked up by the various magazines, right there. The lead that was picked up
by the newspapers.
By the newspapers is their decision and yours and the like to choose what it is you want to focus on. One line out of a 446-page book.
What would you have picked as the lead of that book? I'm asking you. You've had some experience with the media now. You know what a lead is. What's the headline of that book, if not that?
I would have thought maybe something about the ability to persevere in adversity. I would have thought that there's all kinds of things about, why not pick the lead about how Ronald Reagan changed the world, which is in the book.
Well, maybe that's why you were in the Marine Corps and I chose journalism. Let me ask you something about the charge you made last night, and I forget the precise words, but it was that you were, in a sense, almost savaged by some people at the White House, that they not only cut you off, cut you adrift. What was the phrase you used last night? Do you remember?
If you could refresh my recollection, Senator, I'm sure I'd have it. But
I can't. Who do you think was behind that, though? I mean, however you want to categorize it, however.
I really don't know. I would like to know. I think that there were a lot of people at various levels in the various competing hierarchies of the White House who had a hand in that. Clearly, that's not something that Ronald Reagan personally orchestrated. I have my suspicions. I believe it could well have come from the Chief of Staff's office, a number of the people in there.
Don Reagan at that time?
Well, his office. I mean, I was told by former colleagues at the White House that these were the people that were putting out the word that North was not to be trusted, that North was off on his own, that this was a wild man, a renegade operating from the basement of the White House.
What about
You
Mrs.
heard those
Reagan?
stories. I have no reason to know that it was Mrs. Reagan.
No, I'm not asking you what you know. There's no way you should know it or could know it, but what does your nose tell you on that one?
I'm sure that Mrs. Reagan, based on the things that she said publicly that I saw, read, and heard, felt grievously offended by the way my actions were portrayed throughout that period of time, up through the hearings.
You think this notion of using the diversion as a diversion, which is something you have also charged in your book, that's the kind of thing that Nancy Reagan might have approved of?
I'm not saying it was Nancy Reagan. I'm thinking, what I said is I think it was a very convenient distraction to use the diversion as the focal point for all of what transpired between November of 1986 and the end of the hearings in '87.
All right, Colonel North, we're going to take a break. When we come back, that famous first trip to Tehran, and what I promise you are some fascinating background stories of what happened on that trip in a moment.
Where do you want to be in 20 years?
Well, my father worked for the same company for 39 years. He got 2 weeks vacation, but we never traveled far. He was saving to put 3 kids through college. At 65, he retired. At 67, he died. How can I invest so that after my kids graduate, I can enjoy the second half of my life?
You can get there from here with Shearson Lehman Brothers.
The white zone is for immediate.
We didn't design the new Mazda MX-3 to be like apple pie. Jalapenos were what we had in mind. Because if something's not worth having an opinion about it, it's not worth having. And with the only V6 in its class, the MX-3 is one hot chili pepper. Hey, you're not John Doe. Why drive his car? The new MX-3 from the new Mazda.
It just feels right!
Even when it comes to luxury cars, there's nothing like word-of-mouth advertising.
Lincoln Town Car is the epitome of unabashed American-style luxury.
The people have spoken. America's #1 dream car is Lincoln Town Car.
Our readers' poll declared Lincoln Town Car as the best domestic automobile by a wide margin.
See your 5-star Lincoln Mercury dealer.
Food reporter Bert Wolf for Puritan Oil from the makers of Crisco.
The newspapers are filled with saturated fat. If you're reading the stories and cooking smarter for your family, and you'd like to know once and for all which type of cooking oil is lowest in saturated fat, read the back of the Puritan label. Here's the most common vegetable oil. Here's olive oil, corn oil, and Puritan oil. It's lower than all three. Puritan oil, 94% unsaturated. No oil is lower. Now here's a smart way to make a chicken stir fry. With skinless chicken, white meat only, it has less fat, but it still tastes great because Crisco makes Puritan oil. And they make it to let the delicious, light taste of your cooking come through. With Puritan, you can cut down on saturated fat, and I promise your family won't miss it.
94% unsaturated Puritan oil from Crisco. Trust Crisco, because you're cooking for your family.
They say they'll get you a loan. No credit needed, no questions asked. So why won't they talk to 2020? Is it really money for nothing?
2020 Friday. Parents concerned about the quality of children's TV tomorrow, what you can do to make it better.
Also, Paul McCartney will be here on Good Morning America tomorrow.
The head of our little delegation was Bud McFarlane, my former boss. He was flying to Tehran as Ronald Reagan's personal envoy. No mission from the land of the great Satan could be expected to be greeted with flowers, which is why we were traveling under phony names and false passports, courtesy of the CIA.
Now, speaking of the CIA, I know you weren't looking at the picture, but you know the picture well. A couple of faces are boxed out there. You had members of the CIA along on the trip with you.
We did.
When you arrived, you had every expectation that you would be met, if not by a high-ranking delegation, at least by a mid-level delegation. What actually happened when you got there?
Well, we weren't met at all. In fact, we had been led to believe that we were going to meet, probably not at the airport, but shortly after we arrived, with then Speaker of the Parliament, or the Majlis, Hashemi Rafsanjani. And we'd been told that by Monitor Ghorbanifar. In point of fact, we waited...
Now, Ghorbanifar was the arms dealer who acted as sort of an intermediary.
The initial intermediary, right. The one provided to us by the Israeli
So
government.
when you got there and there was no one there to meet you...
We waited.
How long?
Oh, it was a protracted period of time, and it was very hot. The reception center had been stripped, essentially. Eventually, after a phone call, Ghorbanifar and a delegation arrived in a dilapidated convoy of what appeared to be used cars, and delivered us forthwith to the former Tehran Hilton.
I've got to pick up on a couple of things that have been mentioned in the past, but one that we heard at the top of this broadcast. So Bill Casey, before you left, hands you this little package with, what, poison pills?
I thankfully never had to open them, but I took that to be what indeed they were for.
You must have had some times over the last 5 years when you, when you considered that package.
No, I have, in point of fact, I don't know what would have happened if it had all gone the wrong way, whether I would have been able to do that or not.
But it was that uncertain a mission when you went over to Tehran.
It was. There was no doubt great concern that this group would be acknowledged, get back, not make it all the way. The uncertainty was what added to the danger of it.
Now, I want to pick up on a few of what are really trivialities, but they're sort of fun trivialities because so much attention was focused on them when it first came out at the time. There was the story of the Bible. There was the story of the pistols. And, of course, there was the story of the famous chocolate cake in the shape of a key.
Yeah.
You want to clarify that?
Well,
pick up with the chocolate cake.
The chocolate cake was actually a gift that Ghorbanifar wanted to give to his mother. He had asked Nir and I to provide, get the cake.
Amram, the Israeli who was traveling
yes,
as a member of the U.S. delegation.
As a member of the U.S. delegation. And Nir and I had gone to a kosher delicatessen in Tel Aviv, picked up the cake that Ami had ordered, and we put it on the airplane with us.
Key-shaped cake?
No, just a plain rectangular cake about the size of my notebook here. It was in a box. I put it in the sink of the galley of the aircraft. Above the galley, in the cabinets above, I had placed the 3 boxes of pistols that we had gotten. Each pistol box had in it a key, and the key was inserted in the little decorative lock. When I opened the cabinet to get some coffee cups out for coffee en route, one of the keys vibrated loose, landed in the middle of the cake where the top of the box is up off it, and lodged itself in the cake in such a way that it really messed up the decorative icing. I took the key, laid it flat down in the cake, and joked with, I believe, George Cave, that this would be taken as the key to open up her heart to us for Mrs. Ghorbanifar. That whole story got somehow convoluted over, as so many others did, that it was a key-shaped cake that the United States had brought as a gift to, I guess, the Ayatollah.
What ultimately happened to the cake?
The cake, according to what I saw, the cake was eaten by the Revolutionary Guards who were protecting us.
Guarding you.
And keeping us while we were there.
In the minute or so that we have left in this segment, sort of wrap up for us then. What actually, I mean, at flank speed here, what actually happened then during those negotiations? Certainly in listening to the tapes, it sounded as though it was arms for hostages. I mean, whatever the lead up to it was.
Well, there is no doubt, Ted, and I don't think anybody who is involved in this could say otherwise, that what this whole initiative began as a truly straightforward effort to open a new entree to Iran became Arms for Hostages. And certainly by the time we were in Tehran in May of 1986, it became a straight barter arrangement as to how many of what would be exchanged for how many living hostages.
It was, of course, that mission ended up being a total failure, and you had to leave. But you seem to feel that if only a little more patience had been shown, maybe a few more hours even, you would have gotten a couple of hostages out.
I believed that then, and I believe it today. I think if we had been more patient, if we had contacted Washington for the permission that would have been required to accept less than all of the hostages, that we could have brought at least 2 of them home.
And why didn't you wait?
Bud's instructions were that it was all or nothing.
Bud McFarlane?
Yes.
He was the leader of the delegation?
He was the head of the delegation.
And he wasn't willing to call back home?
No, he was not.
Because?
You'd have to ask Bud why. He very clearly said to me and to Howard Teicher and to everyone else that his instructions were all or nothing.
All of the attention on overseas missions that you've made have focused either on Iran or the Contras, but there was a mission that you had in which you went to London to meet with Manuel Noriega. I'd like you just to take a pause right now, take a deep breath. When we come back, we'll talk about that mission, the Noriega mission, in a moment.
This Nightline exclusive will continue after these messages.
If you don't have AT&T 800 service and trouble hits, who knows how long you could be out? Only AT&T automatically protects you through the 800 assurance policy. With AT&T, you would be guaranteed back in touch in 30 minutes or less. With anyone else? Who knows? But if you do have AT&T, your 800 service is guaranteed. That's not all. Since AT&T connects calls faster and has the fewest blocked calls, more 800 calls get through. So you can make more sales. With all that, why choose any other 800 service? Better service, better results. Another AT&T advantage. Call about our 800 offer.
Well, here it is, gentlemen. Top of the world. Now, I put my camera here. Your vehicle would face out over the cliffs. What do you think? Look, if you plan to claim your vehicle's as good as a Jeep, you really need this shot in your commercial. How are we going to get our vehicle up here?
Helicopter.
We'll lift it. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Great. Let's go down and make some calls.
Yeah, same thing. It's going to be a great commercial.
I'm alive. Howard Weber.
Alive. Jessica Weber.
For a free list of cars with airbags, see your Allstate agent.
There's one battery that backs you with free jumpstart service anywhere, for any reason. Die Hard.
Can't believe I left my lights on.
Sears Die Hard. More power when you need it most.
Who's gonna back you better than Sears?
Power windows are just one of the many useful features you get with the extra value option package on the 1992 Toyota 4Runner. So is air conditioning, power door locks, cruise control, power side mirrors, and special chrome trim. Of course, up to $900 savings is a pretty nice feature, too. And just imagine what you can do with that.
In 1986, you went to London, you and Dick Secord, to meet with Manuel Noriega at his request.
We did, Ted. And that's a matter of record that that meeting took place. Unfortunately, I have to tell you that I have now been subpoenaed for the trial of Manuel Noriega, and we're not going to be able to talk much further about that particular meeting.
All right, now, and I'm the first to state it. You and I talked about 3 weeks ago. Obviously, that was before you had been subpoenaed. There was no reason why you couldn't talk about it then. Since I told our audience that I was going to raise it with you, and quite literally during the commercial, you advised me that you had been subpoenaed and you wouldn't be able to talk about it. The story, as you told it to me then, and you may be able to nod, wink, or just sit there in stony silence, I'm not quite sure which.
You may get subpoenaed too, Ted.
I may get subpoenaed too. You told me at that time that when you met with Noriega, he made a proposal to you and Dick Secord at that time that was a bit of a wild one, namely that he was prepared to assassinate, in behalf of the United States, some of the leadership of the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. And that you and Dick Secord said to him, as gently as you could, that, you know, the United States wasn't in the assassination game anymore. However, if...
I'm not sure I used the word anymore, Ted. I want to be very clear about that.
You're right. You may not have used that, and I'm not operating from notes here. However, should General Noriega be inclined toward knocking off a few base camps or arranging for some base camps to be knocked off, that would not be taken amiss back in Washington. Is my memory essentially correct?
Well, let me just say, as a matter of policy, the administration I served in, and certainly this administration, has faithfully adhered to the prohibition against assassinations, and I was not at all reluctant to remind people of that if the occasion came up.
Right. Now, as to the second part of what I mentioned, quoting you, quoting Noriega, or rather quoting you, quoting yourselves, you and Dick Secord to Noriega, saying if, on the other hand, they wanted to knock off a few base camps, Sandinista base camps, that would not be taken amiss.
There's, if I may answer in a more general fashion, because of the outstanding subpoena, the administration went to some lengths, and I was directed to go to some lengths to find support within the region for those who would support the Nicaraguan resistance operations against the Sandinistas. That included dealings with all of the countries surrounding Nicaragua.
Including Panama. That's the stony silence, right?
Well,
all right. Then it's my saying it, including Panama. You know what is so curious about the timing of that particular meeting, though, is that it took place, I think, about 10 days after the New York Times did a rather scathing piece on Noriega, accusing him of being involved in drug dealing. Now, whether or not this is something that, you know, that might come up in your subpoena, I don't know. You'll have to make that judgment. But it seems strange that a White House official would be going to meet with Noriega and engage in this kind of discussion when it has just been revealed, and I'm assuming now that maybe you didn't know, or maybe no one had told you before, that Noriega might be involved in drug dealing. Wasn't a meeting like that, I mean, wasn't the timing of that meeting kind of strange?
I don't think it makes much difference in terms of the timing. There's no doubt that there were many, many allegations about Noriega's involvement, not just in drug dealing, but in Cuban front companies and various activities that are illegal, that were wrong, and there was great concern in the administration for stopping those. I think that was fairly widespread.
Stopping them or cleaning up his image?
I think on our part it was stopping him, and perhaps on his part it was cleaning up his image.
Well, the reason I raise the question is here's a copy, and honest, I have trouble reading your writing, but it has been interpreted for me. This is a page from that famous diary that you kept. Can you just read for me what it says down at the bottom, Marie Noriega?
Well, first, it's not a diary, Ted. It was notes that I made pursuant to carrying out my duties. But,
okay, the date is?
24 August 86, it says. And I guess you're referring to this one down here, which says meeting with Dewey.
That's Dewey Claridge of the CIA.
Probably. Send word back to Noriega to meet in Euro or Israel. Tell Abrams that Noriega has asked for meeting. You got me, can't read my own writing. Cleaning up image. at meeting with N, how to clean up image, 5 stars, and I must confess that the copy isn't clear enough to make up the rest of it.
Does it refresh your memory at all about cleaning up Noriega's image, though?
No, but I think it was fairly well known that he was anxious to do so, and that he wanted to make sure that his image was enhanced. There's no doubt about that.
Do you think his offer, however, and I understand it wasn't accepted, but his offer to assassinate leaders of the Sandinistas could be seen in his mind as kind of a quid pro quo for the United States then being willing to sort of smooth over what was clearly a messy image that he had at that time? And there is also, I think, a reference down there to some kind of weapons deliveries.
Well, you'd have to ask him what he had in his mind.
I'm really asking what you had in your mind at that time when you went to meet with him.
Well, I was authorized to go and have this meeting as I've reported it, and I'm reluctant to go much further because I'm not at all anxious to violate the advice of counsel at this point, even with you, Ted.
You got good counsel. I think that's probably good advice.
Nonetheless, I do want you to understand that when George Shultz or the administration decided that it was useful to talk to Noriega, it was in the national interest of the United States to do various things to ensure that the Panama Canal traffic was not interrupted, in an effort to hope that you'd ensure some kind of democratic transition in Panama, both of which were issues in doubt at the time.
And also the notion that, after all, those Contras did need help.
Oh, no doubt about it.
And Noriega could be helpful in that regard.
Apparently had been.
And, I mean, I'm assuming, if I were Noriega's attorney, I'd probably want to subpoena you, too, because the case he wants to make is, hey, I helped these guys out one hell of a lot. I was their boy.
You'd have to ask them.
Okay. We'll be back with Colonel North with more in just a moment.
You know, it's not something we talk about.
Then don't talk about it.
But when Raymond gets...
Gets what?
You know, constipated.
What?
I give him Phillips Milk of Magnesia.
Put that away.
Phillips works overnight and immediately starts soothing the stomach acid Ray sometimes gets when he's feeling...
Oh, Maureen.
Well, it's true, honey.
Only Phillips relieves constipation overnight and soothes your upset stomach.
It can happen to anybody.
But you don't even know these people.
The white zone is for immediate...
We didn't design the new Mazda MX-3 to be like apple pie. Jalapenos were what we had in mind. Because if something's not worth having an opinion about it, it's not worth having. And with the only V6 in its class, the MX-3 is one hot chili pepper. Hey, you're not John Doe. Why drive his car? The new MX-3 from the new Mazda.
It just feels right!
A grapefruit drink that's actually sweet? Yep. New Ocean Spray Ruby Red grapefruit juice drink. It's got a sweet taste that's really different. Say this is grapefruit juice. This is Ruby Red. Grapefruit juice? Ruby Red. Yeah, it's got a surprisingly sweet taste that grapefruit juice never had.
It's sweet.
New Ocean Spray Ruby Red grapefruit juice drink, because there's grapefruit juice. And now there's surprisingly sweet Ruby Red.
Does the sniffling and sneezing that's keeping you up at night tell you your cold pill isn't doing all it should? Does your coughing and sore throat give you the feeling those tiny time pills aren't so advanced? Then it's time to try the new NyQuil Liquid Cap. It has the relief you expect of liquid medicines for coughs and sore throats, plus relief for sneezing and congestion. The Vicks NyQuil Liquid Cap. The very first nighttime sniffling, sneezing, coughing, aching, sore throat fever so you can rest. Liquid Cap.
Winter is just around the corner, so I'm heading to Thrifty Auto Supply. The friendly people at Thrifty Auto are always happy to answer any questions. Plus, they have everything I need to keep my car running smooth. You'll find Pure Later oil filters now $1 off, and Pure Later air filters $2 off. For a quick start, Thrifty's own 65-month battery is on sale for only $29.99. Service, selection, and low prices. No wonder I keep coming back. If you want it, we've got it. Thrifty Auto Supply.
On the one hand, George Bush says he never thought this was an arms for hostages deal, right?
Sure, same as the president's position.
Same as the president's position.
Exactly. I'm saying it never became clear until we saw that it was arms for hostages, until Mr. Durenberger came out to my house and explained it all in excruciating detail.
Mr.
And that
Vice
was
President?
in December, a couple of months after the cover was blown on this operation.
I understand. Now, there is George Bush, and that, of course, was during the campaign in 1988. And he is saying, in effect, that he did not know the details of the arms for hostages in Tehran until Senator Durenberger, who was then, as you remember, on the Senate Intelligence Committee, came out in December of 1986. That was actually after you got canned, right?
As I remember it, yes. Yeah.
Until December of 1986, Senator Durenberger came out and briefed the vice president. Is that compelling to you?
I have no reason to dispute that. There's nothing in my book that disputes that.
No. I mean, forget about your book for a moment. I'm just asking you to draw on your memory and tell me whether it is reasonable to you that the vice president, who, after all, in July of that year, had met with your friend Amram Nir, who was the advisor on counterterrorism to the Israeli prime minister. George Bush had met with Amram Nir in Jerusalem in July of that year. Presumably the subject of arms to Iran had come up, wouldn't you think?
You're going to have to ask either Amram Nir or Vice President Bush.
Well, Amram Nir is dead and George Bush isn't talking.
Well, George Bush did talk, and that's not fair, Ted. What I think is happening here is that there's an effort to make me into a prosecutor, and I'm not. And let me finish this time, please. This is not a book about trashing Ronald Reagan or George Bush. It's not an attempt to in any way inculpate people who I can't definitively say they did this or they did that. I tried to provide a perspective on the events that I lived through for 5.5 years, provide a little context by describing how I got there, provide a little description of what I went through as a consequence of it. I have some fairly strong feelings, both ways, about Ronald Wilson Reagan. I think he changed this country dramatically. I think he was served well by then Vice President Bush, and I think that Ronald Reagan built a foundation on which the whole world has dramatically changed under President Bush's tenure. Now, this book is not about trashing that. This book is about my experience in this whole thing. And what the then Vice President said to you in that interview that you did in the campaign is fully consistent with what I have in this book. And there's nothing I can say to you tonight that's any different.
You are quite, in fact, the name George Bush barely appears in your book.
And George Bush was not in my chain of command. I mean, I reported to the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States, and he reported to the President.
But George Bush was at many of the meetings that you attended, National Security Council meetings?
Absolutely.
Right?
National Security Planning Group meetings, NSC meetings, all kinds of them.
And yet, I mean, your contention has been throughout, and certainly more forcefully now than ever before, that you were not this loose cannon rolling around on the deck of the ship of state that all those other folks up there, from the president, you don't say it from the president on down, but including the president of the United States, knew about it. You're telling me you don't think the vice president knew?
What I said in that book and what I say to you this evening is I have no reason to believe that what Vice President Bush told you in that campaign interview that you did is in any way inconsistent with the facts.
What about aid to the Contras? Same thing?
Same thing.
Even though and you do quote this in your book, he sent you a thank you note on, what was it, Thanksgiving of 1986?
It was Thanksgiving of...
85, 86?
1985.
85. And in it, he thanks you for what?
Well, if I may, I'd read it.
Please.
As I head off to Maine for Thanksgiving, starts Dear Ollie, en route to Kennebunkport, 11/27/85. As I head off to Maine for Thanksgiving, I just want to wish you a happy one with the hope that you'll get some well-deserved rest. One of the many things I have to be thankful for is the way in which you have performed under fire in tough situations. Your dedication and tireless work with the hostage thing and with Central America really give me cause for great pride in you, and thanks. Get some turkey, George Bush.
Now, what do you think he was thanking you for?
I had gone with Vice President Bush into El Salvador in 1983. He had...
Now, this is 1985. Now, if there's one thing George Bush is known for, it is that he's an extremely courteous man who writes thank you notes right away. Doesn't usually wait 2 years.
Well, it's a little less than 2 years, but there well could have been any number of issues that caused him to send me that note. We had been intensely involved in the hostage matter. As you know, he was involved as the overall supervisor of what is defined in the book as the project, a very sensitive national security project that I was the coordinator for.
Having to do with?
Having nothing to do with either Iran or hostages.
But those are the two things that are...
But what I'm saying to you is that the predicate for him, or the preambular activity for him writing that is today unknown to me.
Okay. We've got to take another break. We'll be back with more with Ollie North in just a moment.
This Nightline exclusive will continue after these messages.
Rough, tight, dry skin? That stops with Curel. When you apply Curel regularly, you'll feel its fast-absorbing rehydration formula take over. First, it seals in the healing moisturizers. Then the soothing Curel therapy rehydrates your dry skin. First it seals, then it heals. There's a clear line between other moisturizing formulas and Curel's rehydration formula. Curel for dry skin. First it seals, then it heals.
Buying 100% Colombian coffee can be tricky if you don't know what to look for. Because some coffee is only part Colombian. And some coffee isn't any part Colombian. So how can you be sure you're getting the richest coffee in the world? Always look for Juan Valdez. He'll only be on brands that are 100% Colombian coffee. The richest coffee in the world.
Pain from just one sensitive tooth can start the domino effect. Pain can make you stop brushing, lead to plaque buildup, gingivitis, periodontal disease, even tooth loss. Sensodyne toothpaste helps stop the pain and the domino effect.
I've got a 6 a.m. flight. I've got to get some Z's.
Nitol safely helps you fall asleep fast so you can get your Z's. Nitol or maximum strength Nitol.
Nitol will help you get your Z's.
Okay, guys, here's the plan. We're on a fast break to the department store. We slant down to the drugstore. Everybody along to the hardware store.
Shopping doesn't have to be this complicated. Come to High School Pharmacy, where we've got everything you need. For temporary relief of most cold and allergy symptoms, choose Benadryl, tablets, caplets, or elixir. Your choice, $3.49. Jergens Advanced Therapy Lotion heals and prevents dry, rough skin. 15-ounce bonus size is only $2.99. Making your life easier. That's High School Pharmacy with 22 locations to serve you.
The Cut, Style, and Perm Shop. A complete full-service salon. Hair, nails, and tanning. Style cuts are just $8 at the Cut, Style, and Perm Shop. At the Cut, Style, and Perm Shop, $24.95 will get you unlimited tanning for a month. At the Cut, Style, and Perm Shop, your hair service is guaranteed. Southeast 82nd and Start, 253-8033.
We were called to a meeting in Director Casey's office. Claire George, me, Chief Latin America 1, Oliver North, the director. The director looked at Ollie and said, "Ollie, Alan tells me you're operating in Central America. Is that true?" Ollie looked at the director and said, "No." The director said, "Good. I want you to understand you're not to operate in Central America."
Now, that story that Alan Fires told in before congressional committee there. You remember that meeting?
I have a general recollection of the meeting.
This is no trick question. It
Oh,
really
come
is.
on, Senator.
No. This is you. What I'm asking you is, did Casey and you cook that up beforehand? I mean,
That
sure
was
sounds cooked up.
classic Bill Casey. Bill wanted to make real sure that his people were as protected as they could be. And that is also Bill Casey. He had great concern for his people. He knew that they were being called upon to testify. The intelligence traffic was full of Oliver North doing this and Dick Secord doing that. And he knew well what that meant. And he knew that it placed his people in jeopardy. Many of those intelligence reports ended up on Capitol Hill. They were circulated around the administration. He did his best to clean it up. He wanted us to improve our communications security. And at the same time, he wanted to make sure that his own people who had to go up there and testify frequently could go up there and say, it ain't so.
So, as Alan Fires assumed, that was a charade.
Yes.
And Casey had said to you beforehand, I'm gonna ask you, you messing around in Central America, you're gonna
Here's
say
how
no.
it's gonna go.
Huh? Here's how it's gonna go.
Yes.
You like Casey.
I had enormous admiration for Bill Casey.
He was, in effect, and I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, he was sort of the godfather of your operation in many ways. I mean, you came into this as something of an innocent. People think of you as a real, hotshot clandestine operative, but that was not your background. You were an infantry officer.
Indeed.
So how and where did Casey help you?
Oh, I guess the first step in the process was my going to him and finding out how to set up an overseas bank account for wire transfers with telex codes and the ability to accept the money that the President and Bud McFarlane had arranged for from Saudi Arabia. And that was the first step in my real operational involvement in the spring of 1984.
And whom did he send you to?
Well, he told me to go to Adolfo Calero, who was a man that we could trust, that was a man that had incredible integrity, and was a man who would honestly disperse the monies for the purposes that they were intended.
He also put you onto Dick Secord, right?
Yes, he did. That was somewhat later on when it became necessary to help them with the kinds of logistics that the CIA was pulling back from. As the CIA finances ran out and they were withdrawing, he suggested Dick Secord as a person who could fill that gap.
But really there was then sort of a passing of the baton. In other words, once Congress said, U.S. government can't do it, then it became this covert operation, which was still was it being run by William Casey, or was Ollie North running it?
Well, in fact, the Nicaraguan resistance was running it.
No, I'm talking about the American involvement.
I became the American, I suppose, counterpart, the American liaison, if you will.
Bill Casey was a little bit disgusted with you at times. Again, I don't mean that to sound nasty. It's just you were such an innocent in this thing at the beginning.
Well,
codes,
open
phone calls.
My lack of experience, I think, was manifest in the way I would have to go to him to find out how to do various things. He provided code books and communications equipment, and would almost in disgust would say, you don't understand anything. Here's how you do it. And he became, in many respects, the way in which I learned how to do these kinds of things. It's not part of your basic Marine infantry officer's training.
We're just about out of time. We're going to have a minute or so when we come back, but we will do that in just a moment.
This Nightline exclusive has been brought to you by Lexus.
It's not Waterford Crystal or a Hasselblad lens. It's a headlamp. And if you think that's impressive, wait till you see what's attached. Introducing the new Lexus ES 300 Sport Sedan.
How'd you get those flowers in there? Lady
And now, there's new, longer-lasting Glade Carpet Potpourri. So now, the freshness lasts even longer. Spray it, shake it, or pump it.
No potpourris like Glade.
Campbell's heard your healthy request.
Low cholesterol.
Less salt.
But lots of taste.
Here's our answer. New Campbell's Healthy Request ready-to-serve soups. All the great taste you want without some things you don't. New Campbell's Healthy Request. And healthy.
I'm alive. Howard Weber.
Alive. Jessica Weber.
For a free list of cars with airbags, see your Allstate agent.
As Human Resource Manager for Pius Schmidt Westerdahl, we turn to Trend College to help us recruit qualified candidates.
The nice thing about Trend graduates is that as we train them, they move on to other positions. They all have Lotus, they all have Word Perfect, they all have good typing skills, they have 10 key by touch. The basic things, we don't have to train them anymore. They already have in place.
Trend College graduates fit in very well professionally.
Trend College.
A grapefruit drink that's actually sweet? Yep. New Ocean Spray Ruby Red grapefruit juice drink. It's got a sweet taste that's really different. Say this is grapefruit juice. This is Ruby Red. Grapefruit juice? Ruby Red. Yeah, it's got a surprisingly sweet taste that grapefruit juice never had.
It's sweet.
New Ocean Spray Ruby Red grapefruit juice drink, because there's grapefruit juice. And now there's surprisingly sweet Ruby Red.
Colonel North, I've been around you enough now over these last few weeks to know that whenever you're asked about your political future and do you have any ambitions, you invoke your father's name and said, Dad said, never say never, right?
He did indeed.
Beyond that, however, is it even a possibility that Ollie North would run, let's say, for the Senate from Virginia?
I think anything's possible, Ted. I believe that the most important thing I can do now is to try and help my family put our life back together, get back on our feet, and hopefully get our children a little bit older before I would realistically consider something like that.
But family aside for a moment, if the family says okay, is it something, is there a fire burning in your belly on that one?
My best friend and I would have to have a lot of long talks about it before I could talk her into thinking that's a good idea.
Colonel North, thanks very much. You've got a long, grueling book tour ahead of you and a whole lot of interviews, I suspect, like this one. But it was gracious of you to come here first, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ted.
That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.